All right, we're ready for Psalm 43 to 46. The questions I handed out to you for tonight had 43 to 48. And the reason for that being that when we studied this particular trimester last time, we had covered all of the remaining Psalms in one trimester. And so we pushed them out to two trimesters to make everything work out because we're out of sync with our studies because of COVID and because of our hermeneutics class, etc. But anyway, be that as it may, we're not covering as many Psalms. So we should be covering 43 to 46. More about that here in a moment. I want to back up and review a little bit of our introductory information, and it's just a quick review because we don't have time to go in depth. And there's a reason for that because of the type of questions I'm handing to you for this trimester. But anyway, a psalm is simply a song, as we mentioned in our introduction in the last trimester. It's been called the Songbook of the Bible. Who wrote the Psalms? That's going to be something we're looking for in each one of these Psalms, and we've done that so far. But in the little graph I've handed to you for questions, we're looking for who the author may be. David wrote 73 of the Psalms that we know of. Asaph wrote 12. Sons of Korah wrote 12. We're studying we're starting with the sons of Korah tonight. Solomon wrote 2. Moses 1. Heman wrote 1. Ethan wrote 1. And then 48 are anonymous. Some of which may have been written by David. So David likely wrote more than the 73 that we have noted and identified with David. And so you're watching for that in that information about the author. You're watching for that in the text itself. It may say a Psalm of David or the sons of Korah, or some of those that are unidentified. We may look for some language that may identify it as perhaps fitting David. Now, this is what I wanted us to review here. This is taken from Haley's class notes, Homer Haley's class notes he taught at FC a number of years ago, of the type of Psalms. And in your handout, what type of Psalm is this? Some Psalms, for example, are acrostic or alphabetic. And we've looked at a number of those, 9 and 10. We'll see that in 111 and 112, and obviously 119 is an acrostic or an alphabetic psalm. A psalm could be in more than one category. Some other things about the types of psalm. There are ethical psalms that teach an ethical lesson, like Psalm 1. He labels some, like Psalm 113, as a hallelujah psalm. There's historical psalm. 106 is a classic historical. Psalm 105 goes with that. And so if there is a psalm that just deals with the history of Israel in detail, a great deal of history, it's a historical psalm. There may be imprecatory psalms where you're invoking a curse upon your enemy, praying that the enemy would be defeated, something would happen to them. Tonight we're going to look at a messianic psalm like Psalm 22. There's penitential psalms we've already seen in Psalm 32, and we'll see it again in Psalm 51. There are songs of ascent. When we get to Psalm 130 to 134, there's the songs of ascent, so we won't worry about that just yet. There's songs of suffering, songs of thanksgiving, and that's just the classification that Haley has suggested. So what we're looking for here in your handout, or your question is, what kind of psalm is this? What type? It may be a song of lament. It may be a song that's a prayer. It may be a song of just mere praise. It may be a song of thanksgiving. And whatever you put there is not going to be a wrong answer. It's just, how do you classify this psalm? And so that's one of the things I wanted to review in our introduction. The books of Psalms we've talked about already. We're in the second book, which started with Psalm 42. I'm going to leave that alone and get on to our outline. So what we're looking for in our handout is the type of psalm, the author. What's the message of this psalm? In other words, is this psalm saying that we need to put our trust and our confidence in God in time of trouble? Or is it saying that we praise God for the deliverance that's already taken place? Or maybe it's saying something else. Maybe it's messianic. And then we're looking for some practical things. So we'll get to all of that here in just a moment. Now, this is your handout of what we're looking for if you don't have a copy of that. And if you miss a class, that's the same kind of information we're looking for each week. So if you don't get a question or a handout, that should be Psalm 43 to 46 for tonight. It kind of got excited and got ahead. So 47 to 50 next time, only 4 psalms. So you have a little more time to spend with each psalm. Questions or comments about where we're going before we get into Psalm 43? And when we're asking for an outline, just a brief, maybe not a detailed outline, but it may be just simply verses 1 and 2 deal with this, and 3 to 7 deal with this, and here's, that's only 2 points maybe, or maybe there's 3 points, whatever, in the psalm, and then we'll list some practical things. All right, now, we're starting with Psalm 43 because we've already covered Psalm 42, but we've got to talk about Psalm 42 when we talk about Psalm 43. Why? They go together, and originally they appeared as one psalm in the Hebrew text. And so here is a psalm that goes hand in hand. Now, seemingly Psalm 43 provides some answer to the questions or the problem that is raised, or at least solution to the problem that's raised in Psalm 42. And so here's what Psalm 42 is dealing with. We call it a longing for God, the soul thirsting for God. But here's the thing I want you to remember, and if you weren't here, take note of this at verse 4. It said, when I remember these things, I'll pour out my soul, for I used to go with the multitude when I went with them to the house of God. Now, we talked about some possibilities. I won't list all the possibilities again, but perhaps, and we left it in the realm of perhaps, that the psalmist is being prevented from going to the house of God for some reason. And he longs to go there. And I think more evidence of that may be given when we get into Psalm 43, when we get to verses 3 and 4, that he wants deliverance from God. He wants God to do something. And the whole purpose of that is that he might go to the house of God and that he might worship God. So it does go hand in hand with Psalm 43. Make sense? So that's why we need to go back and touch on Psalm 42. All right, so let's go to Psalm 43. What kind of psalm would you call this, or what type of psalm? And we may have several different answers here, and all of which may be right. It's a song, you might say it's something else. It's a prayer. It's obviously a request. It ties in with Psalm 42, which also was a request. So it's a prayer. Anything else? I think Haley listed as a didactic or instructional psalm, giving instruction. Here's what we do. Any psalm that tells us here's how you live, here's what you do, here's how you act, in this circumstance is an instructional psalm. Anything else on the type of psalm? All right, the author. The sons of Korah. Now, it's not identified in the text at the beginning of the psalm, but if this originally was one psalm, Psalm 42 has told us the author, and that's the sons of Korah. Now, we talked about the sons of Korah last time, that they were of the tribe of Levi. They were a guild of singers. They were the keepers of the gate of the sanctuary, 1 Chronicles chapter 9 and verse 19. But anyway, that's who they would have been. So what would you say is the message or the point of this psalm? When you get through reading it, and you walk away from it, here's what I got out of it. Here's the point. What was it? Okay. Lead me because I doubt. Okay. What else? What's the point? All right. Plea for vindication. And he may be fleeing from Absalom. That may be part of what's preventing him, or not David, but if the sons of Korah, it may be something similar to that that's preventing going to the service of the Lord or to the place of worship. I call this simply the thirsting for God in time of trouble. Now remember, in Psalm 42, there was this yearning or longing for God. Same thing found here. This is thirsting for God in time of trouble. Now, here's what happens in the outline, or in the psalm. I think I took this from Haley himself. And that is, it starts with a plea for deliverance. There is some obstacle that, according to Psalm 42, is preventing him from being and doing what he wants to do or needs to do, going to the place of worship. So anyway, be that as it may, here's the plea for deliverance, verses 1 and 2. And so notice he pictures God here in verse 1 as his judge. He pictures him as his advocate and as his deliverer. So he says, first of all, vindicate me, O God. God's his judge. He pleads to God as a judge. And plead my cause against the ungodly nation. God is his advocate, pleading on his behalf. And then deliver me from the deceitful and unjust man. God is his deliverer. And the reason is, he said, that he cries upon God, he said, for you are the God of my strength. And then notice he raises the question, why do you cast me off? I will go mourning because of the oppression of my enemy. So obviously he's talking about something that an enemy or an enemy nation is doing. But he says at verse 2, why do you cast me off? What do you make of that? How do you explain that? In other words, you probably would not pray to God saying to God, if dealing with you, or an enemy nation was dealing with our nation, you probably wouldn't turn to God and say, God, why have you cast me or cast us off?
Maybe they're considering, the ones that wrote this, that God is not answering their prayer in the time that they would want him to. He's doing it in his own time. So they're saying, like, why are you waiting to vindicate me or to save me, or, it's not as fast as they want it. They're not getting immediate vindication. They're have to wait on it until God wants it and does it.
All right, that's a valid point, that often God reacts on a different timetable and with a different speed than we would like. So why have you not acted yet? Why am I still being prevented? What else? That's good thought. Leupold says at this juncture, the why of it all eludes him, that is the author, so painful that he commits it to God. In other words, this is such a painful experience, I don't know why, so he just throws it into the hands of God. Why are you doing this? Quite often, biblical writers will attribute to God something that God merely allows. And we'll see more of that in the other Psalms. Not that God does that, or God causes it, but God allows it. For example, Matthew 6, lead us not into temptation. That implies that there are times God does lead us into temptation. Does God actually lead us into temptation? No. Does God allow it? Yes. But it's attributed to God in that statement in Matthew 6. So there are a number of things that God may allow that it's attributed to him. So the question probably more is, why are you allowing, or as Tim suggested, continuing to allow this? So he's crying out to God for deliverance. Now let's look at verses 3 and 4. Now this gets to the goal of what this is about. He said, send out your light. That may include, if not specifically refer to God's mercy. Send your light and your truth and let them lead me. May I be led by your goodness and by your mercy and by your direction and your word. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your tabernacle, that I may do what? Verse 4. That I might go to the altar and worship God, is what he's talking about. To God my exceeding joy. Now notice, one author made this observation I thought worth taking note of. That he's not longing for the sanctuary just to be at the sanctuary, to see the sanctuary, but he's longing to be accepted of God. He wants to go to the sanctuary that he might be accepted of God. I want to go worship God. I want to go to the sanctuary and worship my God. But it's not just, I want to be at the sanctuary. I want to go and be accepted of God. God is, notice how he describes God at verse 4, my exceeding joy, and on the harp I will praise you, O God, my God. That I want the deliverance from this. Not that I be free, I want deliverance so I can go worship. Does that make sense? I want to go worship. So that makes me think, if this is one psalm, that the allusion in verse, what he's alluding to in verse 4 of 42 is, there's some sense perhaps in which he was being hindered from going to the sanctuary, and consequently he's asking God for deliverance from whatever the oppression is. We don't know. Whatever that may be, may I be delivered from that. May you vindicate me so that I may go and I may worship my God. All right. Now let's get verse 5 and finish the psalm, and then we'll see what practical things we learn. He hopes in God, and that will deliver those who are discouraged. He said, why are you cast down, O my soul? If you make marginal notes, make a note to see back to chapter 42 or Psalm 42 and verse 11. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Makes me think this is the continuation as in the Hebrew text, the continuation of one psalm. So why are you cast down, O my soul? What does that mean to be my soul to be cast down? Another way, we don't. If I walked up to you and asked you, how are you doing? You probably wouldn't say, oh, my soul is cast down. Discouraged. That's all it's talking about. It's just discouragement. So why are you discouraged? Well, he is discouraged. He's discouraged because something seems to be hindering him from going to the sanctuary. He's not being able to do what God would have him to do or what God wants him to do. And so why am I so discouraged, oh my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? And the answer to that is, verse 5, that's why it's said to be a didactic or an instructional psalm. Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him. I have my hope and my confidence and my trust is in God. So in other words, he's saying, I am so discouraged. What am I going to do? What I'm going to do is put my hope and my trust and my confidence in God, and then I'll go worship, and consequently, I'm lifted from a discouragement. Does that make sense? How can I lift myself out of this discouragement? Well, here's what I'll do. I'll put my hope and my confidence, and God is said to be the help of my countenance and my God. Now, that's an interesting phrase, the help of my countenance. What does that suggest to you? He lifts our spirits, yeah. Your discouragement being cast down in your soul, as it's worded here, is often reflected in our countenance. And so the countenance changes as we put our confidence and our trust in God. Does that make sense? Overcome the discouragement. All right, let's go back to your little handout. And so let's talk about practical things. Practical things you learn from this psalm. It's a short psalm, but it's full of practical things. What do you see? What a privilege, absolutely. It is not something I have to go do, and I just got to do it, but I don't really care whether to do it or not, but it's a privilege and an honor. And he was so discouraged if he was hindered from that in any shape, form, or fashion. What else? Practical you take home with you. Good point. Being led by the truth. What else? Say again. It's good to go to the house of God. We'll see that concept again a little later in Psalm 122. I see at verse 5 what lifts us up when we're cast down. When we think the whole world is crumbling around us, what can I do? Put my trust and my hope and my confidence in God, and that lifts my countenance. All right, let's go to Psalm 44. Psalm 44, what type of psalm is this? All right, it's a prayer for deliverance. What else could you say? Jensen says it must be classified as a psalm of lament. I'll give him that. It is a prayer and a plea to Jehovah. Anything else on Psalm 44? It's the longest of the psalms we'll cover tonight. All right. What do we know about the author? Sons of Korah. Again, same ones that we saw before. All right. What's the message of Psalm 44?
Great victories of God for Israel, the past and present.
All right. Great victories in the past. What else would you say? Yeah, some kind of distress based upon what he's done in the past. Good point. Very good point. Anything else? There seems to be a cry to God because of some national distress. As one author puts it, there's some national reverses. National distress is going on. And it's a cry to God because of that. Now let's see what we have in the psalm. Then we'll look at the practical things. He remembers, the author or authors remember God's mercy and power in the past, and that gives them confidence for the future. And so let's see what he says about the past. There's something very practical as we start off here. That we have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us. But we've heard these stories of the past, and he's going to talk about the ancient history of Israel. And where'd they hear it? From their fathers. This is what Psalm 78 talks about. About one generation teaches the next generation. And that generation teaches the next generation. We see in the book of Judges, there arose a generation after the days of Joshua that knew not God. Now, why did they not know God? I think Psalm 78 gives us the insight. It's because that generation did not teach the next generation. So here's just something practical about how we know things, and that is by learning that from our fathers. And so what they learned, verses 1 to 3. Yeah, the history of driving out the nations with your hand, but them, that is your people, you planted, and how you afflicted the peoples and cast them out. And they did not gain the possession by their own sword. In other words, talking about the conquering of the land of Canaan. That we were told by our fathers, it wasn't by their own strength that they conquered that. They were attributing that to the hand of God. Nor did their own arm save them. But it was your right hand, verse 3. Your arm and the light of your countenance, because you favored them. It was through your strength. We recognize the conquering of the land and receiving of the land and driving out the nations was by the power of God. We were told that by our fathers. Now beginning at verse 4, we have confidence in this national distress. Based upon that, you'll do that again. So what do you see in 4 to 8? You are my king, O God. So as king of your people, what has he asked God to do? Verse 4. Yeah. Establish victory, command victory. In other words, whatever this distress is, and we'll talk about that, we're going to identify that later. The context is going to tell us a little bit about that. Then command victory to us. We are in distress. We have a problem. And command victories for us. And through you we will push down our enemies, and through your name we will trample those who rise against us. Notice, it's through your power, just like what our fathers told us you did for them. It's through your strength and your power and your might that we do that. So notice at verse 8, in God we boast all day long and praise your name forever. Whatever is going on, it is not because of idolatry. Whatever is going on, it's not because of apostasy. Let's get ahead of ourselves to suggest that verse 20, 21, 22 suggests that there is some problem of suffering for righteousness' sake. We'll get to that in a moment. But it's not because they've gone into evil and they've gone into idolatry and then God oppresses them with an enemy nation. That's not what's going on in this psalm. Not at all. Some national distress, they're suffering for the cause of right. And we'll see that evidence of that as we go along. Let's start at verse 9. Here's how they feel at the moment. How do they feel? Beginning at verse 9. Yeah, they feel dejected. They feel rejected of God. You have cast us off and put us to shame. Now let's stop there for a moment. Again, has God cast them off? Has God just said, I'm done with my people? Now, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm done with them. No, God doesn't just cast them off. It seems as like we see in, for example, in verse 23. It seems as if God is asleep. I don't think it's an accusation. God's asleep at the wheel here, and so God's not paying attention to what's going on. But it's as if God is asleep, and it's as if God has cast them off. In other words, here's something God allows again. And what else do you see? Verse 9, 10, 11, on down through verse 16. Yeah. You make us turn our back on our enemy. Those who hate us took spoil for themselves. And look at verse 12. You sell your people for naught and are not enriched by their price. In other words, we feel like you sold us and we didn't even benefit from being sold. We got none of the money. Now, God didn't literally sell them for money, but it's like you sold us for money and we didn't get any of the money out of that. We didn't benefit out of that. We feel like you sold us. The nations have made us a byword, verse 14. We're in scorn and derision, verse 13. We're shame of face have covered us because of the enemy and the avenger. Sounds like an enemy nation is oppressing them. Sounds like they're in war. There's a national distress. Now let's go to verses 17 to 22. What's the point of 17 to 22 now? Yeah. It feels like you have forgotten us. You're right. But we haven't forgotten you. Here is a declaration of innocence. In other words, this is not because we have gone to idolatry. This is not because we've left you. This is not a statement of arrogance. What this is a statement of is the problem we're facing is not because of our apostasy. That often was the case. So that helps us a little bit, maybe, and I underline the word maybe, with the dating of this. We don't know for sure. But this seems to fit better with the United Kingdom period than in the divided kingdom. Because if it was in the divided kingdom, it would be likely they would be in idolatry. Loophole suggests that it may fit 2 Samuel 10 when David had severely been set back by the Syrians and the Edomites and the Ammonites. Now, was David victorious? Oh yeah. But he had a serious setback in 2 Samuel 10. Now, that's just a thought. I don't have any proof of that, but Loophole suggests it may fit there. Now, let's start with verse 17. We have not forgotten you, nor have we dealt falsely with your covenant. We haven't not turned back. But you have severely broken us. But we have, if we have forgotten the name of our God or stretched out our hands to foreign gods, then would not God have searched this out? In other words, if we have done that, God would know and God would expose that. We haven't committed idolatry at all. Now notice in verse 22, now this is important. Yet for your sake we are killed all day long. Might underline that. There's your key to understanding what's going on. What does that describe and how do I know? All right. All right. It's a description of suffering for the cause of right. Here's how I know. One is the text itself, just taking the text alone, verse 22, for your sake we are killed. We're not killed for our sake because we did something wrong. We're being killed for your sake. Now, where's that quoted in the New Testament? We want to know some New Testament quotations as we come across them. Romans 8:36. So in Romans 8:36, we have this quoted, and it's in the context of Christians suffering persecution. They're suffering for the cause of right without our reading Romans 8. Make sense? That's how it's used. So, what's going on? There's some national distress. Seemingly, they're suffering for the cause of doing what's right. David may have suffered defeat at times because of doing wrong, but there was some defeat that he may have suffered at times when David was doing what was right. And Loophole may be correct. It may refer to 2 Samuel 10. I don't know for sure. But here's the declaration of innocence. This is not because we've done wrong. That's not because we've done wrong. So, beginning of verse 23, what are they going to do? Going to turn to God for help. In other words, it seems like verse 9, God has cast us off and forgotten about us. But we hadn't forgotten Him. It seems like God is asleep, but He's not asleep. And so what we're asking you is to wake and deliver us. So notice beginning of verse 23. Awake, why do you sleep, O Lord? I don't think that's an accusation. God, I think you are asleep, but it's from our vantage point, it seems as if you're not reacting. So would you react, and would you respond, and would you be our deliverer? Arise and do not cast us off forever. What else do you see? 24, 25, 26. Why do you hide your face? For our soul is bowed down to the dust. Here's that discouragement. We are discouraged over this. It's like our face is bowed down to the earth. We're greatly discouraged. And so he ends the psalm with this plea. Verse 26. Arise up for our help, yes, and redeem us for your mercy's sake. Makes sense? Cry to God for some national distress. We're suffering, but we haven't done anything to cause this to do wrong, to receive the wrong, and we're suffering, and so please remember us. Now, let's learn some practical things from that. What do you learn from Psalm 44? All right, yeah. Before I'm ready to talk to God about what needs to be done over this circumstance, I need to look and see, did I create this and did I bring it on myself? And in this case, they said, we did not. We did not. What else? Good point. Yeah, particularly beginning at verse 1. Teach our children about God. We learned this from our fathers. They told us. They told us. What else do you learn?
I think they continued to go to God and ask for it, even though they were in doubt and everything else. They continued to go to God and ask Him to help.
Yeah, we don't understand, but we're still going to go to God. They never lost their faith in God. Sounds a lot like Job. Job had questions and doubts, but he kept going back to God. Never gave up. Let's look at verse 21. Here's something that I learned. We didn't pay attention to this as we came along through the psalm. But would not God, in other words, if we had bowed down and had secretly done some sin, God would know about it. Would not God search us out? For He knows the secrets of the heart. That's interesting. God knows the secrets of the heart. I may do something in secret you don't know about. No one else may know about, but God knows the secrets of the heart. That's an alarming thought. What else do you learn from this psalm before we go to Psalm 45? Absolutely. Sometimes righteous people suffered. Job did. Jesus did. The apostles did. All who live godly will suffer persecution. And so that's a practical thing to learn. I notice in verses 4 to 8 that it's through God that we accomplish anything. They're anticipating victory over the enemy, but it's through you we will push down our enemies, and through your name we will trample those who rise up. Through God we'll do that. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All right, let's go to Psalm 45 now. Psalm 45, 17 verses. What kind of psalm is this? What type of psalm? Say again. Contemplation. All right. Messianic. How do I know it's messianic? Sometimes there's a passage that, in the prophets particularly, we say, this seems to be messianic. And I may not be 100% sure. Others times I can say, I know. I know. Verse 6. Yeah, verse 6. Where's verse 6 quoted? Hebrews 1 and applied to Christ. All right, yeah, verse 6. Author, sons of Korah again. Major point or message, subject? Yeah, the anointed one and his bride, or it is messianic, the marriage of the king to his bride. Now, let's talk about the nature of this psalm. Jensen, you hear me quote from Jensen. It's a little brief summary, and I like Jensen, but Jensen said this is probably a psalm dealing with the marriage of Solomon with the daughter of the king of Egypt, 1 Kings 3:1. And then the principle is applied to the Messiah. Well, that sounds reasonable on the surface, but I like better the concept of loophole. Loophole said that we must forego trying to discover the personage that may have been in the mind of the writer. In other words, what king was he talking about? He said we need to forego that because the hero of this psalm has not been successfully identified with any of the earthly kings. And so his point is that it is purely messianic. I can't argue with that. I know it's messianic because of verse 6. All right. So maybe it did have reference to some king, but the reason, and I think Loophole is correct about this, that if we do that, if we say it had reference to Solomon, then we've got to grapple with verse 6, thy throne, O God. Was Solomon being called God? Well, Jensen said, I think it means he's like God. Well, if it means he's like God, then when it's quoted with reference to Christ, was he like God or was he God? I don't think we can have it both ways. So that's why I think perhaps it's purely messianic. So let's work our way through the psalm and get to the point, and then we'll see if we can get to 46. I want to talk about 46 if we can. So what we have is verse 1 is basically the introduction about that I'll recite my composition, etc. But in 2 to 9, he talks about the king and the king and his beauty. So what do we see about the king and his beauty? Verse 2. He's fairer than the sons of men, and the grace is poured upon his lips, etc. Then verses 3 to 5 pictures him as a warrior and a conqueror. That his sword is by his thigh, and look at verse 5, your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies, and the people fall under you. So whoever this king is, he's a warrior, that he's a conqueror, and he conquers. And then here is the throne that he sits on, and his character. Your throne, O God, is forever and forever. Well, I know that fits Christ. And I know that because of Hebrews chapter 1 and in verse 8. That's evidence of the deity of Christ. The point is, this was never said to an angel, but it was said concerning the Christ. That was Paul's argument in Hebrews 1. So that's how I know it's messianic. It's talking about Christ. His scepter is a scepter of righteousness. You love righteousness. In other words, this is how he reigns. This is the character of his kingdom. And then there's the garments that he wears and the attendants that are around him. It's just describing the beauty and the splendor of this king. All your garments are scented, and the king's daughters and the honorable women follow after, and et cetera, et cetera. So here is the beautiful king, and here he's a warrior. He sits on his throne. He is a righteous king, and then here's all the attendants around him. Now, what do we know about his bride? 10 to 15. Look at verse 10. She forgets something. She forgets her own people and also your father's house. In other words, she puts all of the other attachments aside to be joined to this king. Now, if this is the Messiah, the bride is the church. That's us. What did we just learn from that? The Lord comes first. That is our allegiance to the Lord. We're married to the bride, and all other attachments need to go aside because we as the bride have attached ourselves to the king. Make sense? All right. Now then, let's notice something else. Verse 12, she's favored. She has some beauty and glory of her own. She's well blessed. And then beginning at verse 13 through verse 15, that her appearance and her beauty is seen before all, which suggests again that she has some worth and some glory all her own because she's married to the king. Then finally the conclusion of the psalm is what? 16 through and 17. Yeah, his name will be remembered to all generations. In other words, his fame spread abroad. So the best I can do with the psalm, and I think loopholes convince me on that to try to pin this is Solomon. Others have said, no, it's not Solomon, and they identify some other king of Judah or Israel. And I'm not sure how we know which king this is. That if we're going to pin it on an earthly king, it seems to me to be more purely messianic, and that makes my interpretation of verse 6 much easier. That it's talking about the Messiah. Thy throne, O God, is forever and forever. Make sense? And so here's the beautiful king, his wonderful bride, and it indeed is messianic, and the Hebrew writer tells us that indeed it is. Practical things you learn from that. I learned the deity of Christ, verse 6. What else do we learn? The sacrifice we need to make, verse 10. All right, let's quickly get Psalm 46. It's a short psalm. What kind of psalm is this? What type of psalm? A psalm of consolation, maybe? The author, sons of Korah again. It's a song for Alamoth. These were maidens that may have sung soprano. I'm not sure much more than that. This is the consolation based upon God's power and God's might. 11 verses here. By the way, you might make a marginal note for what it's worth. The song, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, is based on this psalm. It's in the songbook that's in the pew, it's number 16, and that's not noted, but in the Symphonia book, I believe it's number 7, and at the end of that, it's noted that that song is based on this psalm. And indeed, a mighty fortress. So let's quickly notice verses 1 to 3. God is our refuge and our strength. That's the point. The waters roar and the mountains shake with his swelling. God is our confidence and our refuge. So now beginning at verse 4, God is in the midst when the enemy comes, and it's pictured as a stream coming forth from God that flows throughout, and God's in our midst. So wherever we are, whatever we face, whatever disaster comes, God's in our midst. So God is our mighty fortress. So let's get quickly 8 through 11. Our time is gone. You might go back to verse 7 and underline, the Lord of hosts is with us. There's the confidence that God's might and God's power is with us. Now, what do we see in 8 through 11? Quickly, and then we'll be done here. Yeah. God is to be exalted because of the deliverance that he brings, that he makes wars and ceases, he makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and he burns the chariot with fire. In other words, look at God's power and might. Be still and know that I'm the Lord. I will be exalted in the earth. I'll be exalted among the nations. So here's the exalting and praising of God because of his power and because of his might. Psalm 46, 47, and 48 form a trilogy. Some have suggested of praise that deal with the same or similar occasion. We'll talk about how that may be in our study next time. Quickly, lessons we learned from Psalm 46. God is with us. We're dependent upon God. What else? All right, good point. Evidence should speak to us. What else? God is worthy of our praise. Indeed, there is the power of God, and with God we can face any trial. Whatever the trial may be, God is with us. He's like a stream flowing through, and He's there with us. He's in our midst. And so I am comforted based upon God's power and God's might. That's what the psalm is saying. Short psalm, but a powerful psalm at that. All right, that's Psalm 43 to 46. Our time is gone. 47 through 50 next time. And if you didn't get a handout, they will be up on the front pew if they're not up here now, but they will be at the end of the service.